Peter Sloterdijk's book, What Happened in the 20th Century. Chapter 1, The Anthropocene, a stage in the process on the margins of Earth's history. Part 1, Weightless Humanity. In the year 2000, when the Dutch atmospheric chemist Paul J. Crutzen suggested that we use the term Anthropocene, drawing on an analogous concept of the Italian geologist Stoppani, 1824 to 91, from 1873, to designate the present age from the perspective of natural history, it was assumed that this term would remain part of a hermetic discourse that is spoken behind the closed doors of institutes for gas analysis or geophysics. Yet, through a strange series of accidents, the synthetic semantic virus must have succeeded in getting past the quite secure laboratory doors and spreading to the life world in general. We thus get the impression that it easily reproduces itself in the context of the sophisticated feuilleton, the museum, macro-sociology, new religious movements, and literature warning of ecological collapse. The proliferation of this concept can mainly be traced back to the fact that, under the guise of scientific neutrality, it conveys a message of almost unparalleled moral political urgency. A message that can be explicitly formulated as follows. Human beings have become responsible for the habitation and management of the earth as a whole, since their presence upon it is no longer more or less seamlessly integrated with it. The concept Anthropocene, ostensibly a geological term, implies a gesture that, in a juridical context, would be characterized as the designation of a responsible agency, with the attribution of responsibility and addresses provided to which possible accusations can be sent. This is precisely what we have to do today when we attribute the capacity for geohistorical offences to the quote-unquote human being without further specification. When we speak of an Anthropocene, we only seem to be sitting in a geoscientific seminar. In reality, we are taking part in a court case, in a preliminary hearing before the main trial, to be more precise, in which, as a first step, the accused culpability is supposed to be settled. The preliminary hearing is concerned with the question of whether it makes any sense at all to try the offender in question, given that the latter is not of age. This hearing would include the author Stanislaw Lem, among others, who seems to exonerate the human being by awarding him, in a Tellurian context, the status of a quantité négligeable, or as Lem himself puts it, quote, were all humanity taken and crowded together in one place, it would occupy 300 billion litres, or a little less than a third of a cubic kilometre. Sounds like a lot, yet the world's oceans hold 1,285 million cubic kilometres of water. So if all humanity, those 5 billion bodies, were cast into the ocean, the water level would rise less than 1/100 of a millimetre. A single splash, and Earth would be forever depopulated. End quote. In the case of quantitative relations such as these, it does not matter if we introduce present-day humanity, numbering 7 billion, into the picture, instead of a humanity totalling 5 billion, as assumed by Lem, or the 8 or 9 billion that will be reached by the year 2050. In terms of biomass, a randomly and rapidly ever-increasing humanity would remain infinitesimally small, if we could sink humanity toto genere into the ocean. But then, what's the point of putting on trial a species that pales in comparison to the material dimensions of the Gaia system, the hydrosphere? Lem's position, incidentally, is very close to certain classic disparagements of the human being, such as Schopenhauer's contemptuous remark that the human race is like an ephemeral mould on the surface of the planet Earth. The prosecution will reply to these objections that the whole of humanity at its current stage of evolution simply cannot be defined merely in terms of biomass. If humanity is supposed to be put on trial, this is mainly because it epitomizes a meta-biological agency that is able to exert quite a bit more influence on the environment, by virtue of its capacity for action, than we would assume on the basis of its relative physical weightlessness. Obviously, in this context, we immediately think of the technological revolutions of the modern age and their side effects, which, not without reason, are chalked up to collective humanity. In truth, quote-unquote collective humanity initially means European civilization and its technocratic elite. It was the latter that introduced a new agency into the game of global powers from the 17th and 18th centuries onward, with the use of coal and later petroleum in machines. In addition, the discovery and demonstration of the nature of electricity shortly before the year 1800, and the technical mastery of it in the 19th century, gave rise to a new universal in the discourse of energy. Without this new universal, the metabolic interaction of human beings with nature, to recall the Marxist definition of labour, would be inconceivable. The collective that is characterised these days by expressions such as quote-unquote humanity mainly consists of agents who within less than a century have acquired technologies developed in Europe. When Crutzen speaks of an quote Anthropocene, this is a gesture of Dutch courtesy, or avoidance of conflict. In fact, talk of a Eurocene, or a technocene initiated by Europeans, would be more fitting. That human actors have an impact on nature in their turn is not really a new observation. Already in antiquity, deforestations were noted in Greece and Italy that were ascribed to the demand for timber in the shipbuilding industry. The emergence of cultivated landscapes, too, is inconceivable without taking the influence of agriculture, viticulture, and animal husbandry into consideration. The latter, in particular, continues to be an unsettling item on the bill that the ecosystem, Earth, will present to human beings. Only in more recent times has the connection between human pastoral power and political expansionism been emphasised. In macro-historical terms, there is quite clearly a relatively recent, that is, spanning about 3,000 years, causal nexus between raising cattle and imperial politics. Not a few historical empires, such as those of the Romans, the British, the Habsburgs, and the Americans, were ultimately based on the cultivation of herds of livestock that provided their herdsmen with a significant surplus of labour power, mobility, protein, and leather, not to mention the link between being assured a certain caloric intake on a daily basis and political expansionism. In more recent times, we have also become aware that herds of cattle have a considerable impact on the environment because of their metabolic functions. At present, there are supposedly about 1.5 billion cattle on Earth. If we were to dump them all in the ocean, the latter would rise about 5 times as much as it would if humanity itself were dumped there. Even so, we would still be dealing with tenths of a millimetre, and yet would have never left the realm of quasi-weightlessness. Indirect anthropogenic environmental impact due to animal husbandry is nevertheless striking. Every cow maintained by a human being produces a quantity of greenhouse gases in its 30-year lifespan, owing to digestive flatulence that would correspond to a trip of 90,000 kilometres with a mid-range engine. In referring to how widespread the current exercise of human pastoral power has become, we leave the realm of negligible dimensions behind. As the producer of enormous indirect emissions, humanity, in the industrial age, might actually take on a geologically relevant role, despite its weightlessness in terms of biomass. This would result in particular from its operation of enormous fleets of automobiles, airplanes and ships that run on combustion engines. but it would have just as much to do with the heat balance in regions of the world where a pronounced winter gives rise to compensatory, pyrotechnic and architectonic attempts at restoring balance. With these preliminary remarks out of the way, the case against the Anthropocene can be allowed to proceed to a full hearing.